Yeah, I don't know where Ramyak is. That's the only problem.
Ramya may be trying to get a connection. It's not always easy.
She usually texts me. Oh, looks like we're live now. Okay, we're gonna be live. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Nadhi Thekkek. I work for Drive East. I am based in San Francisco, and I am so excited to have these wonderful panelists here with us for our fireside chat. Although I'm not by my fireplace right now, but it's gonna feel intimate. It's gonna feel like it's in my living room. Okay, so. This panel is on politics and art from the practitioner's perspective. And we have Maya Kulkarni here, who premiered a work this week. Internationally renowned artist. I know many of you all know already who all these wonderful artists are, but they recently, Maya Ji and Nazma premiered their work inspired by the Allegory of the Cave this week. And we have Rupa, who's the artistic director of the Navatman Music Collective, and so many other projects. I know I've seen her perform so many times. I'm so happy that she could join us. We have Anisha Mahanta here, and we just saw her wonderful performance a couple nights ago, and I saw her live. Was that last year or 2 years ago? Fantastic
18,
performer as well.
2018.
Brinda Guha, a former or last year's Drive East artist and Kathak practitioner and performer and person of many hats, and I'm going to go into all of that with each of you. So thank you all so much for coming today.
Okay. Thank you. So, thank you so much for making us a part.
Yes, of course. So I'm going to just open up with a question. It's going to be pretty open, and you can disagree or agree with me. It's up to you. But how do you feel like you engage with politics with your art right now? Or not? Like, what is that decision? Where is that intention in your work? Is it that you engage or not engage, and how do you do that? This is for anyone who wants to speak first. And I'll jump up at once, guys.
I'm thinking.
Well, I know that I've seen a lot of different things out there where people are, it's more obvious in the sense that the work is about a political issue. Sometimes it's more subtle that they're looking at historical texts and making sort of references to today, but not outright saying it. So maybe you can talk about a recent work you did and how it does or doesn't line up with that and why.
Nadhi, may I?
Yes, Anisha, please.
Okay. So I think the way I engage, I think it's mostly a sort of, we all, sometimes as a practitioner and a citizen, whatever it's happening around, surrounding us, we do get affected by it. So my entire stance, the moment we talk about the politics and the moment we talk about dance, I do relate this entire understanding of dance and politics with two basic, two things that keeps oscillating in my mind. One, of course, my art, the dance itself could be an orientation of an analysis of political enactments using my art as a method, as an instrument, as a critique to voice against the oppressive norms or practices. One, and another could be a sort of undertaking of philosophized version of the word politics and include a global area of study with historical informed accounts. Now, this whole perspective, the moment I talk about dance, art form, and the idea of politics, I see it at multiple levels. So, it takes me to 15th century when Satriya, the dance form, which I'm a disciple, I've been learning. So it takes me to that point of emergence, bhakti movement. So the great saint poet Shankaradeva, when he started this entire movement, it is a movement. It was a social movement, and he used the art as a kind of communicate a larger picture to speak about social welfare, to speak about issues of humanity, to speak about issues of peace. And because Assam at that time was, a very disturbed area, it was called as Kamrupa. So you can just, if anyone Googles in 15th century Kamrupa, a lot of ethnic conflicts were going on. There were issues of caste hierarchy, and a lot of things were going on. So in that disturbing situation, here comes an art form, with an inclusive, all-inclusive, and ideals of humanity, peace, and where the art itself was speaking. And the saint poet Shankaradeva, that time itself, he brought the idea of global home by constantly referring Naraloka. So there is in all his work, in all his literature that he had penned, there was a reference to this Naraloka where we all are sort of contributing in that Naraloka, and we are also sort of victims of that Naraloka. So from that idea of global home, there was a sort of, a concept of citizenship in a sense, not the way we see it right now, but there was a constant reference of Nara with Bhala, Naratanu Bhala, that's what he has been saying. So, where we are inculcating, where we are imbibing these ideals of cultural assimilation, where we are imbibing these ideas of harmony, where we're imbibing these ideas of humanity, friendship, and maitri. So, where we are all working towards a cultural assimilation. So, that was his idea. And then through the art form, he connected. So Kamrupa was a different area, different when it was not like the way we see Assam, the entire map today. So Kamrupa was a huge area. So Shankaradeva, with his literature, he tried to bridge Kamrupa to larger India. So, Bharat Varsha, there's a constant reference to that Bharat Varsha.
Yeah.
So that is one point. Second point, when I take my art form, it takes me again to the freedom movement of India. Yesterday 15th August is we all know it's Independence Day. So it takes us to the wake of that freedom movement when great literatures like Lakshminath Bejborwa, you know, there was a moment when the entire corpus of literature penned down generations, ago of Bejborwa, and the entire culture, the heritage, was seen as a sort of, treasure, was seen as a sort of heritage, quote unquote, of national importance or of immense importance, where you are talking about the art form as a sort of signifier of individual identity. So that's what again is a sort of art form becoming a voice of individual identity.
It's so true.
Next,
I mean, I just wanted to, I want to come back to that because I think that's going to come
yeah,
up a lot. Can you hear me?
yes,
Okay,
yes, I can hear you.
yeah, I want to come back to that because
And
there's going
yeah,
to be a
yeah,
lot of parallels here.
yes, no,
With,
I'll be speaking. And just last point was that,
yeah,
like, when in 2000, the year 2000, when Satriya, we all know got they're recognized as one of the major Indian dance traditions. So that also came as a sort of, again, heritage, again, a voice from Assam, in quest of an individual identity in a whole national arena. So
right.
that's what Satriya getting represented or getting recognized as one of the major Indian dance traditions. So I see this at multiple levels and even at individual level today. When I'm talking to you,
Yeah,
what has made this entire tradition of 15th century a lived experience for
right.
us, for me, not talking about just a 15th century art form, but as a person, as a practitioner with that lived experience, is
Right.
this ideational concepts of Naraloka, ideational concepts of global citizen, Nara, Naratanu Bhala, all these ideational concepts of harmony, social welfare, and humanity, which had been inculcated to us with this, through this process of art.
Right. Well, I just want to take a moment because I want to welcome Ramya Ramnarayan to the group. She's we were wondering, we're hoping that we weren't keeping you waking you up too early. I know you're in Chennai. She's joining us from India and has created work for Driveys on colorism. And so she does also have insights into what we're talking about, Ramyaka, is how you bring or don't bring politics into your art and why. Is it more obvious or is it maybe more subtle? And I think Anvesha just is the first one who spoke. And so we're asking everyone to kind of put in their 2 cents about this.
Good evening, everybody, and good morning to Anvesha.
Good morning.
Good morning. So it's lovely to join a group of dancers and a dance musician. Rupa, how are you? Brinda? Mayaji, namaste. And it's nice to have a conversation with people who have had an extensive thought process about these meaningful questions. If I were to respond to political art, there is a lot of poetry in Bharatanatyam. As Bharatanatyam has an enormous history, there's lots of poetry that we could work with to speak important topics that's relevant to society, that's relevant to be a reminder. See, art oftentimes is seen as an entertainment. However, it's also an education. It's something to be in the theater and get enriched. So it's a reminder for the audience as to many valuable societal issues. So I would stop here. I mean, I want, as Nadhi, you said, people haven't responded yet. Just a little introduction that there's a lot that Bharatanatyam poetry offers, or we've drawn inspiration from all languages, all parts of the country, many times even English text. So, we have very vast works that we have explored as artists of Bharatanatyam. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramyaka. Would anyone else like to chime in on this?
I think, every artist comes at this question differently, and I think that's a good thing. Just in the same way that craft looks different on every dancing body, the way that the same song could be sung by many singers and it would sound different. And so I think there's a level of interpretation that is essential to any artistic endeavor, and that's a beautiful thing about art. I will say, though, that whether I think you explicitly say you are political and your work is political or you don't, art inherently feels like somewhat of a radical act in and of itself, because I think we're in a world, particularly in a capitalist world, where value is constantly being ascribed to things, often monetary value. Hierarchies are the norm. Stacking people against each other, thinking in terms of what does a good offer me? What kind of value does a good offer me? Or how can I think differently about this person versus another person based on something like intelligence or money or beauty, right? I mean, we're kind of trained and conditioned, and I think success in a capitalist system relies somewhat on being able to sort of slice and dice our world in very hierarchical ways. And in ways, and productivity, I think, also is sort of such a strong value in our culture. What are you doing? Why? What's the practical use of that thing that you're doing? These are questions we ask ourselves as simply as, what have I accomplished today, right? That pressure to be productive, I think, is sort of an extension of kind of a capitalist instinct to be of worth in the world. In that sense, I feel that art is inherently radical because it's about an expression. It's in real time. And you can't always necessarily say craft is worth something. Like, how would you price your dance training? How do you price your thinking? How do you price what you feel in response to a song or a poem? So I think already the artist is somewhat taking on the world in a different way, in a way that doesn't always compute. And especially if you've dedicated your life to craft, and that's already saying something about what's possible in a world that's actually telling you to think otherwise and to think in normative ways. So just as one way to think about this topic, I wanted to put that out there.
Can I come in,
Yes.
Nadhi?
Mayadi, I can't see you. Can you lower the camera just a little bit?
Yeah.
There you go. Yes.
Okay. Politics and art have been forever, interconnected. Practitioner's point of view. Now, I don't want to talk about politics. I talk about that all the time. But how does a dancer, musician, I'll leave that to Rupa, but how does a dancer bring in abstract ideas? Because politics deals with questions of power, who gets what, when, and how. That is the central question of power. And power has an impact. So I think most of the time, what we are depicting as dancers, I do, and others do, is the impact of power. In other words, the impact of having done politics, discriminated, denied rights, abused, or all kind of this. Ramya talked about tremendous amount of literature and poems in Bharatanatyam that we dance. And very typical is, of course, the whole question of Nandanar's poetry and whole genre of poetry that comes along with it. Where the lower caste people, who have been discriminated against, and their bhakti kind of elevates them. So it's a very subtle message saying that we are all the same, and yet there are all these customs and traditions that oppress us. So the way in which oppression is rejected is different when you're talking about classical arts that are steeped in the kind of values, that are traditional values. If you're talking about modern dance, then of course you can express liberation as you wish. But as long as we are adhering to the themes and the topics, the songs and the poetry that has been handed down to us, we are in a way kind of bound by the boundaries within which these art forms, the poetry had progressed. So I think that the dancers who are conscious and politically activist need to really think through what it is that they are dancing. Doing nayikas, for example, are invariably, of course, there are nayikas that are very strong also, but there are much of the nayikas kind of in a way subservient, if you like, or whatever other word you want to use. It's interdependent existence. It's not an independent existence of a woman that is being depicted, but an interdependent existence. So my point is that classical arts have certain limitations. We can navigate that intelligently by choosing the right kind of poetry to narrate or to depict. But those are challenges that must be accepted. Issues of humanity and expressing abstract ideas, we have to understand them and bring it up in the way in which we compose movement, the choreograph, the dance form itself, or whatever dance you're doing. That must be informed by these ideas, but there is hardly any way to depict humanity per se as an abstract. Similarly, the idea of liberation, you can write about it, but you can't depict it unless you show how people are liberated. That means you're discussing the impact of power, impact of oppression, and then how that victimizes the individual and how they liberate themselves from it. I'll stop there, but I think those are some of the problems for the practitioner, of art.
Right. No, and it's so true. I mean, especially, and there's a follow-up question from the audience, but I regarding that. But Brinda, do you want to chime in before we get to the audience question?
Sure. Thank you for having me, first of all, on this panel. There's so many good seeds already planted for conversation. I would say that from the practitioner's perspective, I'm specifically speaking for myself, I am interested in process. I am interested in how we uncover decolonized processes in creating art. a lot of times it is performative, and then other times the moment calls for re-envisioning of how we create. And so decolonizing process has been a big part of the way that I approach this topic, because I think we're kind of living in a world right now where I am very wary of separating art and politics. I find it very irresponsible, because personally, I feel that art has been placed on a hierarchical structure where a lot of times artists don't feel like they have to participate in the things that are affecting us daily, because we have our art to do it, to say what we need to say. And I don't know if that's always enough. But that could be currently how I'm feeling. I don't know. But often I feel like if we have so much to say with our art, how do we kind of bridge those gaps between real life? And I'm looking at process. I'm looking at, the curriculum. I'm looking at, do we all face the front towards the teacher, or do we learn in a circle? I'm looking at, how do I explain what a pronoun means to someone who was raised in this country? How do I explain that? What earth are they giving their invoking blessings from, right? What land is this? What's their community like? Who are they engaging with, right? When I'm sharing the art, I'm wary of passing down culture as if culture does not interact with other culture. And so trying to figure out ways to hold space for that communication while we're practicing and while we're learning about Indian arts is actually really, really important to me at this current time. I'm in the process of rewriting my company curriculum, and that usually includes something as simple as the pranam into the warm-up. What does our warm-up entail? What are we warming up, and why? What does this actually make us feel? How are we able to access and invigorate the parts of our bodies that are going to help us express? And do we have access to those parts of our body without fear? These are the kinds of things that I'm trying to implement in my contemporary Indian company, because we are sharing language across many, many different identity barriers. And I don't know how I can do that by just giving them information, historical information, and not connecting it to the experience that we're actually having in the room. So finding those things in process has been very, very important to me in order to be able to effectively then tell the story that I want to tell, because that authenticity has to come from a place of relation, and our relationship to each other is going to dictate how we tell this story, right? And so I'm really looking at it in the rehearsal space right now.
I mean, it brings me, this audience question I think is very relevant to almost everyone's comments, because they're saying, so once you make that decision on that content or your process or even where you are, like Anisha was saying, and the identity aspect of it, have you faced ramifications to performing what you think you need to perform, or to be practicing what you think you need to be practicing, for kind of like sticking to what you believe and feel? Like, what sort of ramification, maybe it might be a touchy subject, but what are the ramifications you might observe in others or have seen in your own careers? And has that stopped you, or has that hindered you?
Nadhi?
Yes.
Nadhi? A very quick kind of thing that Brunda said. I want to clarify. The gist of going back to the early part of what she said. So it is irresponsible on our part if we don't reflect the current political situation and all the wrong injustices, etc., that we can notice. So this is an art with a message, and an art does not carry a message is not considered responsible art. That is one position. But this is a highly controversial issue, whether art is meant only good if it carries a message, or whether art can exist for itself. Art for itself as opposed to art for the message. I don't think that issue has been resolved over time and it's been going on forever. Uh, I don't know. This is a choice an individual artist must make. But I do not think that there should be a judgment about responsibility and irresponsibility on a common platform. I think that the artist should do what they want to do. That is their freedom. Freedom is very important for artists, and I do not think that it should be bound by demands of this nature. Okay, that's my point of view.
Thank you. No, that's so true. I mean, and I think it's been going on Facebook also, this debate for a long time. Ramyaka, I see your hand up. You can unmute.
Yes. Hi. To piggyback on what Brinda had said, many times, even though there is a large Indian community of students that I interact with in my private studios, I do talk about this to them because for all purposes, they are children growing up in the West. And they think very similar to those who are growing up in their schools, like they interact with various different communities and people from different backgrounds. So they do have a very similar thought process. Why do we do this? Why should we follow this? Even simple things like pranam. I would tell them everything we did was to help our body and our mind. Don't see it as a religious, don't see it connected in a way that it's religious. Even when we practice fasting, even when we practice certain movements like prostrating, it helps our lower back. I see it more as an exercise. So if you feel that it leads to something more spiritual or something more valuable to you, take that way. If you've reached there, if you want to see it as a practice that helps as a preparation, see it that way. So I would always give it as a broad explanation, telling them, I have not seen many things as a religious connection. I see that as something which helps us as humans. So it was coined in a very intelligent way, is what I would say. So it's art is a bridge. So it is up to you whether you want to walk a certain path or you're not ready to, but you want to still explore and understand and enjoy.
Thank you, Ramyaka. Anvesha, I just want to hear from you again about this. So in terms of possible ramifications, or even in response to whatever has been said so far, but how do you feel like the points you made?
I think for me, what Ramyaka said, I would just like to add few things. To imagine the situation right now, the way the teaching practice in the US, it would be difficult. But here, even in the present generation, when we are communicating in our art form, the thing which I mentioned even in my past, the philosophized version, that is what gives us the universal significance. So if we are all talking about pranam. So for me, when we teach our generation, when we teach younger generation, the pranam itself is not something, you are just offering respect to the Mother Earth here. So, keeping that space or connecting your body, connecting your mind to that space, connecting your mind to the Mother Earth, not necessarily it should only be Satriya, not necessarily it should only be Bharatanatyam or any art form. The art, your connection of your body to the Mother Earth. So you're offering respect to that. So from that angle of your personal connection to the art form, that is how the journey, takes ahead. So and then taking whatever, like Ramyaka also in the, she's mentioned about the literature. So with that huge corpus of literature, what message of universal significance we can take, that is what is of utmost importance. And I from a present generation, as a present practitioner in the contemporary times, I do connect that whole, that ancient body of literature in that angle. And that is what again helps me in connecting to wider global issues with those ideas. So the art form where we are talking about, it's not just a 15th century art form and a representation of that. It's also, it carries forward a message where the characters, are just sort of symbols. It could be any character, but here the characters which are taken just a sort of instrument to speak about larger issues. So, that is what, throughout my experiences, whatever I had, you know that has helped me in connecting the world. That has been my way of expressing and communication.
Rupa.
Yeah, this is so interesting. Thank you for letting me be a part of this. Um, I think Brinda's comments and Ramyaka's comments and Anisha's comments kind of get at this sense of some kind of authenticity, like art as a reflection of an intention, be you being truly who you are, connecting process to the realities that keep you up at night, thinking of dance as conditioning of the body, or how does a 15th century character relate to me now. But I wonder though, to me, the sanctity of art in a way is that it's an unselfing. Like, as much as it is about us confessing who we are in a courageous way in a world that may not accept us off stage, I think it's also a place to take on a character. And I think particularly if you think about the classical art forms, to learn what it is to be a Radha, even if you completely don't agree with Radha's politics, to unself and take on that is, I think, in a way, that's one of the few spaces where you can think imaginatively and act imaginatively out of your own body. And I think that the beauty of art is that it allows us to build those skills of what would it be to think like someone who's so not like me. And which is why I think it's different than an essayist or someone who writes a thought piece in an article telling you why you need to be political, or giving you facts. An injustice is this statistic and that statistic, so don't you want to be on the right side of history? It's not appealing to your mind. It's how do we get people to think at the instinctive level, to think almost beyond themselves, right? Like, I think empathy requires that. Like, I may think something's obvious to me, but for me to really understand what's going on in someone else's mind, I need to get out of me. And I think art is, particularly the classical arts, because I do think, like, if you think of music, for example, pop music or sort of modern music's a lot about like who you are, what's your vibe, what's your story. You just break up with someone and you write a song about that. It's very in the moment. In a way, I think classical, as much as we can talk on and on about privilege and caste and all the messed up things, but I think in a way, what even the classics, if you think of literature, right, or anything that's come before your time, the beauty of that is that you're allowing your mind to go somewhere else that it wouldn't have gone unless you were in that moment of craft. And I think what attracts those of us that are in these art forms is that ability. And I think that's the gift of it in a way. An actor trains to be a character, right? Like, because they wouldn't actually be that way. And I think what I'm seeing in our modern culture is like so much of a need for authenticity. And I think that's absolutely important. But also somewhere I feel something gets lost in terms of how do we take on new ways of thinking. And I think, and unfortunately, the burden often is placed on those who are the most oppressed. I think in a way to kind of feel like they're heard and seen and acknowledged, but also in some ways to take on the mind of the oppressor to be able to make their case, and I think that's where it gets resentful, I think, for artists when they feel like they have to do everyone's job. But I do think that that's also kind of the gift of art, is that you are, unlike someone else who doesn't have the imaginative potential or the craft, you're able to go into another world, reinvent yourself, present that, and then get people to start thinking differently. And you also transform from that experience. So.
No, it's so true, Rupa. And I think what's happening, at least for the dance world, and not just classical Indian dance, is whose stories are being represented and who is representing them. And it kind of flips this idea of, as a dancer, we're kind of like, we should be able to take on so many different narratives or so many different characters, yet at some point there's a line drawn. Should I be representing that character in my dance in a performance, in a ticketed performance, versus in a practice or in my own individual practice? And I think we're coming to a time of reckoning where that authenticity is not just learning about a narrative, learning about a story, and then representing it, but now it's like, do we now make that space, like take our steps back so that those narratives are not only representative, but those people are there representing them. But that's in the sort of Bay Area dance world is the conversation right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like a Beyonce. Beyonce is different from Sasha Fierce. She's Sasha Fierce when she's on stage, and that allows her to do certain things that right. Beyonce wouldn't do. So that's the crux of the idea that I'm talking about.
We all need a name. So it's actually Mama Fierce is my Instagram name, actually, ironically. Okay. So there are some questions, and also Ramyaka raised her hand. I'm going to ask this question, but then Ramyaka, I want you to just say what you want to say. I just want to put the question out there. This is from the audience on YouTube. Do you automatically embody politics simply by your art existing? Is there fear about being political? I think it was similar to what we asked before. And then how it's already kind of been asked or answered. Okay, Ramyaka, why don't you talk first and I'll sort through the questions.
Yeah, I don't see that artists have to automatically embody politics, but they could if they feel that it's important, because art gives such a great vocabulary and the grammar is so clear that anything can be expressed. Anything, if the artist have had expansive training and a depthful understanding of the craft, of the technique itself, it doesn't hold you back from expressing anything. However, it's not a compulsion. And I don't think personally I've had any fear. But my training itself has taught me to express ideas in a subtle way. Even if I'm doing Sringara Bhakti, I'm not going to, it's not going to be so aggressively in a local, colloquial way like Lokadharmi approach. So that said, even political, even something very intense that's affecting the society has been spoken, I would have a different take to it because I'm staying within my grammar, within the walls of my technique, because I want to stick to the Bharatanatyam that I've studied. So although tradition is change, tradition and the art itself is ever changing and ever growing and ever exciting, because new ideas, new ways, new methods, new mudras, new approach of movements have constantly introduced. I have my own ideas about how the piece has to be steered.
So true. Thank you, Ramyaka. We have a question from the audience from Vignesh. For the artist, is the art form the only tool at your disposal? And why or why not?
Well, can I jump in?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. This is great. This is great discussion. That was a great question. I think that is the art form the only tool at our disposal? I kind of want to take a step back and look at, I took this moment, for example, to look up the word politics in the dictionary, right? And so you look it up and it says, politics is a set of activities that are associated with making decisions in groups or other forms of power relations between individuals, such as distribution of resources or status. So I take a look at that definition and I go, we are, to me, politics is not over there, is what I'm saying. Our existence is political. Like Rupa said in her opening statement, our access to art is a political act in itself. So access to experience our art or access to share our art is a political privilege. And so for me, that is kind of where I look at politics, and commenting on politics versus politics in our process feels disjointed to me. It feels disjointed to make a decision to make a political piece. That's not a concept that I embody, because I think our ability to even create and to even study and to even carry on as a messenger, the art form, is a political privilege. And so for me, and it's a political commentary that a privilege allows. And I am currently in a process of looking at that. And that privilege it comes with a ton of responsibility. And so to answer the question from the audience, I feel like the tools, what other tools do we have other than the art form? The art form is all encompassing, like everyone has already said. There is so much information in our art form. There's so much information in practicing your body and breath through body. There's so much information in technique. There's so many things that are required for us to manifest kind of a higher consciousness through figuring out what our footwork is doing, through figuring out how we're using space, through how we're creating formations, how we're telling story, how we're doing abhinaya. There's so much power in that. That tool is a huge tool. That is a toolbox with which an artist operates, right? I wonder where the responsibility lies. I don't have the answer. That is currently my process. But I wonder where the responsibility of the artist lies in terms of being clear with what it is that they want to say. Is it a form of is it a form of catharsis? Are you having a catharsis in this moment? And do I need to charge people $50 to watch me have a catharsis? Or is it transformative? Is it commentary? Is it planting seeds of change and awakening? I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the artist's actual job is in those moments. I know that an artist is multifaceted, and an artist wants to be able to say whatever it is that they want to say, but I don't necessarily know if we are bound by anything through our art. I think that we have all the tools that we absolutely need to have in order to make the commentary that we want to make. But I think the responsibility and figuring out what it is that we're trying to say and who has access to us saying it is part of the part of the thing that fascinates me, and being part of that conversation. Who gets to watch this? Who gets to be transformed by this? Who gets to study this? And why is it important? If I'm not clear about those things, then I can't necessarily do my job well, I think. And so that's kind of where I am in terms of our tools.
I mean, I think that it's so true. And what I think also Vignesh might be saying, I don't know Vignesh, but is as an artist in your community, you have so many different roles, right? And whatever that community might be, whether it's your university or the students that you teach or your co-artists or collaborators, that there is maybe a responsibility at least to understand the context, if not to act more, to understand the context in which everyone is coming to the table. And I think in that way, I feel like all of you actually act in so many ways that brings your collaborators, your groups, your students together. And that itself is also political. But it is a part of your, I guess, role as an artist in many ways. So I think that is also a part of it. I mean, especially all the women here, I know are so engaged in the community around them, and that is a part of how we act as artists, I think. There are more questions and so many comments. Oh my gosh. So this one question is from Gauri for Mayadi. When you were talking about the traditional repertoire specifically, when talking about limitations and showing liberation or the grammar mechanics of the art itself? Does that ring a bell? It seems like, because when you were saying that that we don't have those in the form that we have to create it, were you saying we were limited by it, or we'd have to create something new? Oh, I think you have to unmute. Mayadi, can you unmute?
Oh, can you hear me now? Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, we're good to go.
Okay. I'm talking about classical art. Classical arts, Bharatanatyam, for example, with which I'm familiar, but I'm sure this is true of Kathakali and other dance forms. Vast vocabulary, we can express everything we like, but I'd like to give a parallel. Why does modern dance come up when ballet was existing? Why? Because ballet could not express things that modern dance wanted to say. In other words, new techniques are generated in order to tell new stories. Dancers are, broadly speaking, telling a story. I don't mean narrative stories. Even if they're just doing pure dance, there is a story behind that. There is a purpose behind that. There is a space that is occupied. There is a story behind that. So what I'm trying to say here now, in the classical arts, we tell stories. More recently, as you all know, that many of the classical characters that are depicted endlessly, like Sita and Draupadi and Shurpanakha and Ahalya and whatever, okay? They've all been reinterpreted by many young dancers who come to it in a different way, and they're looking at it and reinterpreting these characters, and they are now telling us a slightly different story with a different angle, with a different subtext to it. So I think that these kind of things are happening. But if you really want to do something that is very radical, I wonder to what extent classical dance forms as they exist, as they have been handed down, are capable of doing that. I haven't seen really, frankly, and I've seen a lot of dance in my life all over, especially Indian dance. I haven't seen a very radical kind of story being told in a way that is it maintains the aesthetics. What it comes down to is mime. You do mime, you see, but you do not do the kind of what we call dance, you see, which is both nritya natya and really goes to the subtext of it. You can't just do mime and show that I did this and I went to office or I, did a lecture, so on. You can enact this, but it really does not have that something, that magic, that something that is required that makes into a coherent art form. So I think that we have problems of, I won't call them problems, but challenges, let's say, and maybe there is a way out of it, but I haven't seen a successful way out of it by adhering very strictly to the classical forms and depicting, uh, themes or ideas that are very current right now. Are we political? Yes, we're born into a political structure where you are who you're born to, what you can do, your opportunities, everything is dictated by politics. But that is a question of identity. So the question is, this identity is going to be transformed by becoming Radha or becoming Draupadi or becoming Sita. What Sita are you expressing? Are you expressing the Ramcharitmanas Sita, who is a very, submissive woman? Or you expressing some other Sita? So these are the decisions that dancers have to make, and they are political decisions. That's really what I wanted to say. Hello?
Sorry. There's a lot of follow-up questions, and I think there's a similar theme in all the questions. They want to hear about your examples specifically, about specific projects from different artists here. So Shiv asks, is there a particular project you've worked on where you needed to strain your form in order to create something you really wanted to, like what Mayadi is saying, is, are you creating something outside? And a similar question is, how do your own positionality, this is from Aishwarya, hi Aishwarya, how do your own positionality and identity factors as a practitioner influence the type of political themes or ideas you create in your work? So I think they're very similar questions, so you can kind of latch onto whichever one you feel you want to speak to more.
I just, in this Drive East, I just presented Plato's Allegory of the Cave. The Allegory of the Cave, and I'm not going to talk just 2 sentences. Allegory of the Cave has to do with discovery of truth, justice, truth, justice, and beauty, because the Greeks saw these 3 things as one. And this is nothing to do with Greece or India or US or anything. This is a human question. This is a question that all societies need to ask. How do I establish a society that is just, beautiful, and truthful? Okay. Now, Plato's allegory lays it all out as to how we have to shed unreason, how we have to shed our prejudices, our narrow ideas, and transcend that and get out of this cave in which we live and look at the sun, look at the truth in all its fierceness and ferocity. Face it. And if it kills you, still face it. Because ultimately it is like looking at the 1,000 suns. You see, you are transformed and you bring back that message to the society. So anyway, I'll not go on in that, but there are ways in which you can become very political and make very politically informed, steeped in politics kind of compositions and dance.
I want to ask about, I know Anisha is in India, and Ramyaka, I know you're in India now, and you straddled both these places, and Rupa and Brinda were here, and there's a lot going on, everywhere. And especially I want to hear from Anisha, because everything that's been going on in Assam is, I think it's on a platform right now, at least on social media and the news. And how do you feel like those things around you influence your work right now in this moment? Or are you trying to not let it kind of infiltrate your practice? So I think there are a lot of different ways that many artists are dealing with what's going on right now. And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, but I think the audience wants to hear how literally what's outside your door is coming and seeping into your practice or performance. I need to unmute. Anisha is muted. Anisha, I think you're muted. Yeah, there you go. Good.
Am I audible now?
Yes.
Yeah, a lot of things are happening, and it's not something which is happening now. Since at various points of history, there has been so many occurrences, so many things that are happening, political unrest, ethnic conflicts. It's been a part of our history, because Assam is like, we have a lot of ethnic communities, and every indigenous community, we have our own system of culture, our own system of knowledge, and trying to find voices individually. So amidst this situation, and right now with the COVID situation, with the flood situation, whether the center, in Delhi is hearing our voices, hearing our pain, hearing our sufferings. And then there is again the refinery crisis, which has happened, which has burnt down an entire area. So as a citizen of this land, of course, these things do affect. And how do I connect with my art? As like Brinda had said it beautifully, it's not like, you have to be politically engaged or, do something with your art but that entire, as an artist, with your mind, with your body, and your body being present in the situation, these things will some way or the other would be there. And now the way you respond to it with your tool, with your body, with your mind, the way you engage in terms of intellect, with terms of art, it would be a political stance. So what I'm trying to say is like, sort of echoing Brinda said, like it's a unique process. The art itself, your engagement with the art itself is a unique, it's not just a one-time process, right? It's like, layered process. And then you find out your voice, what is happening inside, the pains or the suffering, the loss, or whatever you are feeling, that finds a medium through, through these channels. So what I find, my art itself gives me a sort of establishes, develops a sort of a self, the dancing self, the dancing body, with a larger extended self. And this unique process helps me in creating, of course, with the existing grammar that has been handed down to me, with the existing literature that has been handed down to us. So with my art, it gives me a sort of, this unique process helps me in forming an extended self that, evolves a movement which again, brings together this universal significance of emotions and my own personal emotions. So there is always a constant bonding which is happening. And this layer, like from wherever I am, this Assamese voice, speaking right from right from here, will be talking to you with this kind of, processes that my body has gone through. So it might not be a direct statement like, this is it, this is happening here. And so like, I think Brinda had said, politics is not something here, and you are here and you're constantly. So you are born in, like Mayadi had just said, like, you are born in a political system. You are born with this given structure. And then apart from this, the conflicts, the unrest, or the, what you are going through, and you're finding your presence amidst this situation. So how this presence gets, absorbs this surrounding things, and how, unknowing, sometimes you're not even, conscious, you are not even consciously making a statement, but unknowingly this pains, loss, suffering, or, that voice for justice, that, voice for identity, it comes out spontaneously through your art. For me, this is a unique process where my body, my mind, helps in shaping up an extended self with a much universal significance, with a much larger social message.
That's so true. And what I noticed about seeing all of you perform for so many years is that you all have that embodied in your body or your voice, whatever your art form is. And I noticed that it's also about a deep commitment to your practice. And so, and I think that I want to make that distinction for the audience, because I know there are a lot of young dancers who are very awesomely engaging and discovering with their art and wanting to make political statements. And I think it's wonderful. And right now we have this sort of virtual abyss, maybe a little bit, of people trying to say something. But I think what was really, to me, moving about each of your work that I've seen recently and over the years is that commitment you have to the practice really translate in being able to convey what you're all talking about. And that's where Rupa was talking about authenticity. I think that authenticity comes from that real, from what I've noticed, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is a commitment to practice. Like, I mean, and I want to make that clear for especially people who are watching, that that if you haven't seen them perform, which I'm sure you have, it's like, that there is a huge difference between performers like these and performers who are just starting to delve into these topics. We are sort of ready to wrap up. It is our hour. There were so many wonderful comments, and I mean, everyone's agreeing with everyone, and there's some people disagreeing. So it is quite an exciting chat, but I do want to wrap things up. Does anyone have any last things they want to share before we?
Nadhi, can I just, it's a good thought to think about. You see, Foucault, who was a very great philosopher, and political scientists too, say that the role of an artist and an intellectual, so he includes both, is to really stand outside the society. He must remain independent. By independent, he meant not get swayed by moods of the public or whatever is the going on right now in politics and people taking sides, not be swayed by that. So remain independent, looking in, outside looking in to comment on whatever is going on in a objective manner as an artist, and he can get emotional about it, but he needs to therefore look inside from the outside. So this is something that the role, our role as individual artists, as intellectuals, because artists are intellectuals, and they ought to think about this. It's a very interesting thought as to how we can bring politics and art together. And he said, not respond to something. Artists have their art lives for a long time. Consider a painting. It's not just something about now. It has something that's going to last for a long period of time. The dance ought to be like that too, and music ought to be like that too. So it is really a commentary on the state of things from the outside in, is what Foucault's point was.
So true, and that's a wonderful way to. Oh, Ramyaka has your hand up. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Yes, this time I was able to work with something that has impacted us in the US, such as colorism. And I chose poetry, both from the ancient text and from contemporary, to show what I felt connected to the topic. However, when I see Sangam poetry, it's not just about Shringara or Bhakti, it is about human emotion. It is about what the society conveyed or felt or was enduring at that time. So many topics were spoken in the Sangam literature from 2nd century. And one time I was able to talk about this brave mother who had to send her son to the battlefield. She lost her father, and then the next day she had to send her husband. And then the third day, she was pondering, but then still she felt it is important. She had a responsibility to send a person from her home as a representative for her community, for her kingdom. So it talks about so many different topics, and it's nothing to do with religion or subservient naikas only. So it is up to us as an artist to find those poetry and to portray and remind the audience. The interesting thing about using all of these ancient works is that with very enduring music and these ancient poetry, it leaves a lasting impact. Even when I chose Bharadiyar for colorism, it had a sense of folk rhythm within it. So I didn't have to go clarify that to my audience, but the poetry itself had that when I read it. So I infused folk with Bharatiyar, with Vyasa's poetry, which kind of led to that lingering mood that the audience would have, which will last longer than just the idea which is connective to today's world that I'm seeing. So it's many things which should come together, so which should stay with the audience is what I feel is important as an artist.
It's so true, and I think that's where one of the questions is Mesma is saying, if one must always have politics in your work, why not be a politician or a journalist? And I think, Ramyaka, what you're saying is that lasting emotional impact that we feel, I think that arts have, and of course Mesmaka when she performs has that impact. So and as do all of you. But I'm going to have to. I actually want to keep talking, and I want to get some coffee and have this conversation with you guys all. I wanted to continue. And I know all of us can probably talk through the night. It's happened before with some of us already. So, but I do want to wrap this up, and I thank you all for joining us on this panel, on this live for Drive East, and for all your wonderful performances this year and last year. And hope you guys continue watching. And thank you for coming.
Thank you, Nadhi.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Be a part of it. Thank you.
Let the audience know that we have 2 more panels tomorrow. One is a public town hall where we can really give some hard questions to Sahi and Sridhar and get them to fess up and no, I'm just kidding. And you know, ask the hard questions. And then we have Politics and Art Part 2 from the academic perspective. We have wonderful guests from around the world joining sort of from that research perspective. So we hope you all join us. Thank you all.
Bye.
Good job.